Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is Who's in Control, the advisor or the firm? It's a special industry update with Louis Diamond. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for financial advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more.
Control is a funny thing. Advisors, particularly those who work at big firms, can go on for years building a practice, happily serving clients, perfectly content, all the while feeling as though they have complete control over their business life. That is, until that proverbial something hits the fan. For example, we get inundated with calls from advisors at one firm or another, when perhaps a rumor is leaked online, or a big change at the firm is announced in the press or at the firm's annual meeting. It's events like these that typically prompt advisors to question everything about their business, and it leaves them frustrated and wondering about things they never considered. That is, all the things that are actually out of an advisor's control. But there's a certain reality to this that most advisors who work at a big firm don't consider until it's too late. It's the answer to the question, who's really in control, the advisor or the firm? No doubt, independent advisors don't typically struggle with that answer. That's the beauty of independence. And while you might be thinking this is a sales pitch to break out on your own, that's certainly not the case. Knowing full well that a large majority of our listeners are from employee models, we thought it important to share advice on what the realities are when it comes to control, and more importantly, give you points to consider should you find yourself struggling with what we'll call a change in control, and help you to answer, what would I do if that happened to me? So I've asked Louis Diamond to join me to share a few real-world examples, potential solutions, and proactive strategies an advisor might take when looking to course correct. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, another fun topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to tee it up and I'll frame it this way. A lot of times we hear from advisors in what I'll call crisis mode, where some announcement was just released or a rumor even, maybe it wasn't even a live announcement, and it prompts advisors to think, oh my God, my world has been turned upside down. And so I think the question is, we'll talk about some specific examples of what we mean by things like this, but just at a high level, I think the question is, what do advisors do to not be caught flat-footed?
Yeah, it's a great point. And to your earlier point, I don't think this is about if you're independent, everything is butterflies and rainbows and there's nothing to worry about. I think these are all points that anyone, no matter where they work, what platform they're on, what model they choose to work in and serve their clients, they're meaningful points to consider. I would say if an advisor feels like they're getting caught flat-footed, the first thing always is just to take a deep breath. Like everything's happening quickly. You feel like you got to jump on things. And the last thing you want to do is make a rash decision. So we'll often be a resource for advisors, not meant to position us, but to talk with someone, whether it's a trusted friend, an attorney, depending upon the issue, talk with a consulting firm like ours, and just realize that there's probably precedent for this. It might feel like the end of the world or everything is crumbling in front of you, but you do more harm than good to act rashly and act out of emotion rather than taking a beat and really approaching whatever the issue is in a strategic and manageable way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think rather than being vague, let's not beat around the bush. Let's dive right into some real life examples that come up in our traffic, our conversations with advisors. These are examples of times when we've had advisors come to us in the panic mode. And our point of shining a light on these is not to say, oh my God, you should panic. It's to say, here is things that there's precedent for that might also happen to you. And to get advisors to think critically about how would you react if this same thing happened to you? So let's take them one at a time. I think the most obvious example, and a recent example, at least in the wirehouse world, is compensation plan changes. And UBS was the most notable example of this, made some fairly unfavorable changes to their advisor compensation policy. How do advisors who are basically blindsided by this information, Lewis, how should they react? Like, what's the right way for them to think about a firm making a change like that?
This one is a great example because it was announced at the end of 2024. So now, as we're recording this, it's the middle of 2025. So we've seen the full cycle of the changes rolled out. There's panic, there's anger, there's frustration, and then there's acceptance. And then there's people that act upon those frustrations. And there's people that just take it in and they're not happy about it, but they let it go. So I recorded a special episode in reaction to the UBS compensation plan change. And to me, the best piece of advice I offered in that was to just take it in. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to have so many different emotions. It's your compensation after all. And you do great work for clients and you want it to be predictable. And if you do right by clients, you want to know that you have a lens into what you're going to make next year. So what we saw with the UBS example was a lot of anger, and rightfully so. We saw some people quickly jump into action and start taking meetings and really start thinking about leaving. Most advisors, and I think some of the shrewdest advisors, they first just took it in, took a breath. They then tried to lobby management, tried to get an audience with the right people, and waited a little bit. They waited a couple weeks, a month or two, to see if they still felt the same way. And I know when advisors handle it that way, when they come to us, they're able to act not in emotion, but out of strategy and out of looking at the bigger picture. So I think it's a good one of just like there's an element of taking it on the chin. If you work for a firm, you got to take the good with the bad. The good is the platform's great, the brand, my clients are here, I can serve them well. The bad is sometimes you're not fully in control. And that concept is usually encapsulated very well when it's time for annual compensation plan changes.
Yeah, it's such a hot button, sensitive topic that it always bound to ruffle some feathers. I guess what I'm wondering is, and this one's not just about compensation plan changes, but about some of these other ones we're going to talk about too. What's your perception? Is your perception that advisors are really that angry about compensation plan changes and they lost money and that's what this is about? Or do you think that when these changes happen, it gives advisors an opportunity or forces advisors to think long and hard about their firm and their relationship with their firm? And now they start to notice all these other frustrations? Because I get the sense it's some of that.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think anyone should leave or does leave strictly because of a compensation plan change, unless there's something drastic, like we're taking away the grid and everyone's getting a salary and bonus, which I don't think will happen. Then I think it's more of, okay, like I've been feeling these things, like I've been worried and frustrated that I don't have the support staff that I think I deserve. It's harder to get business done. I'm not able to expense stuff like I used to. The compensation keeps changing. They're not reinvesting in the firm. And then the compensation plan change is just the face of what people are feeling. So I think it could be a little bit of both.
I think that's very fair. And look, I think this is one where a lot of times the perceived antidote to this is independence. And that's certainly what the recruiters in the independent space will say is if you're unhappy with constantly changing payout grids, the only way to ever really get around that is take control of your own P&L. And there's some validity to that, but what are your thoughts on models like Raymond James and RBC? Like, how do they address this? Because it doesn't feel like firms like that do the annual whole shebang around comp reveals like the wirehouse.
I agree. One way to take full control over compensation or more control is to own your own business. And you're picking how you allocate expenses to your business, how many people to hire, how much to spend on marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not for everyone. It might be a bridge too far, just not the right fit. So there are firms, like we call them the regional firms, Ray J, Stifel, Ameriprise, RBC, Oppenheimer, Baird, et cetera, that part of their DNA and their pitch to advisors is it's very simple how you're paid. And we don't have a history or track record of changing payouts. It still means, though, coming back to control, as long as you're an employee of a firm, as long as you're on someone else's platform, that they have the right to change the rules of the road either for regulatory reasons, for business reasons, or any other reason that they like. So no one has a crystal ball. You can't predict the future, just like picking stocks. It's more so looking at past data and just understanding the way firms operate and perhaps gravitating to firms that don't have a history of changing payouts, if that's important, but recognizing that what's true now may not be true in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality, I think, of W 2 life. It's not just the wires, it's any W 2 firm. Advisors struggle with this constant battle for control, where the reality is the firm may have policies in place today, but that's not to say those policies will remain in place in perpetuity. And advisors often wonder about what guardrails do I have if and when XYZ happens. But to drive home your point that this is not isolated to the traditional W 2 world, that advisors from all angles or all sides of the landscape struggle with this idea of really not being necessarily in complete control. Let's talk about the next example of this, which is your firm is buying a competitor's firm. And let's use an independent example here. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about LPL and Commonwealth, mostly from the perspective of how it's going to impact the Commonwealth advisors. But tell me about the impact on LPL advisors. So I'm talking now about, is it disruptive for advisors at a firm when their firm is the purchaser?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good example. Again, we're not trying to beat the drum on independence. So most advisors at LPL are independent. They own their own businesses. But this is an example where LPL makes, I think, a pretty shrewd purchase to buy Commonwealth, which is probably one of the more impressive broker dealers that they ever could have thought of buying. And all of a sudden, the LPL infrastructure is adding 3,000 or so advisors. I think it's another example for the Commonwealth advisors as the advisors registered with the acquired broker dealer. But there is some element of change for LPL advisors. The firm went from about 30,000 advisors to 33,000 advisors. The services might be stretched a little bit thin. You just don't really know. I mean, I think another recent example would be like UBS buying Credit Suisse, or Wells Fargo buying the wealth management business of Credit Suisse, or Raymond James buying Alex Brown. Typically, the firm doing the acquiring, I think the advisors are going to be a little bit more insulated. Like they're already at the firm, not a lot is changing. But sometimes it could be a brand thing, right? Where it's, okay, our firm just bought XYZ firm and that firm is down market. None of the examples I said, I think that's the case, but you never know what the future holds. There's always persistent rumors of UBS buying someone or UBS being sold and not really knowing what the future holds. It's a really good example of the corporate strategy team and the corporate development team of these firms are going to make decisions, and they likely won't be able to recognize the downstream impacts on their current advisors.
Yeah, it's really well said. And I think, look, it's obvious that this is one. We'll talk now about the impact on the other side of the equation, meaning your firm is being sold or rumored to be sold. But wanted to bring that up because I do think it's important and it's often overlooked that, yeah, there's cultural reasons why, from the acquiring firm's perspective, something might not be a great fit. And also to your point, the tax on the infrastructure is legitimate, right? Think about a firm like LPL, who has certainly ramped up in response to a lot of their acquisitions, but Commonwealth plus Atria plus their own recruiting efforts, they've added a tremendous number of advisors to their chassis. And the question is, are they able to support it? And I think in the case of LPL, the answer is seemingly yes, but it's a concern and it's a fair question that advisors ask.
I think too, it's understanding the strategic rationale behind deals. LPL is always and will always be unapologetically large, and they look at scale as their secret sauce or their sword in the marketplace. So if you look at a deal like this, okay, LPL is just pushing their chips to the center of the table again to drive home this strategy. But I think it's different if it was the inverse. If Commonwealth, for example, a 3,000 advisor boutique broker dealer was suddenly buying another firm, then the question is, okay, what is this, a money grab, or what's the strategy here? So I think that's part of it, is just understanding the strategic rationale and either buying into it, liking what it could mean for the firm, or maybe feeling like you're no longer in congruence or in lockstep with the way the firm is moving forward.
That's a really smart point. I'm going to take a different spin on the topic of your firm being sold. My opinion is the reality of a firm being sold, they're all so unique and one-off where there's not a whole lot we can speculate on in terms of if your firm is being sold, what should you do? It's hard to give blanket guidance on that. So what I think I'll ask instead is, what about if there's a rumor that your firm is going to be sold, or your firm's in potentially talks to sell to private equity, or you've heard a rumor that they're going to sell to a wirehouse? What are advisors in that situation? How do you counsel them?
Yeah, I mean, I've typically seen that when there's smoke, there's fire. Sometimes rumors are, that's what they are. There's rumors and nothing happens. Maybe there was a deck that went around about the firm, or the firm was just testing the market, or it's just completely false and a competitor was trying to gain some points with someone. Usually, though, I'd say 8 times out of 10 at least, where there's smoke, there's fire. Even if it's just a rumor now, the rumors typically started somewhere. So if you feel like there is a chance your firm might sell to a strategic buyer, sell to private equity, or just not be the same going forward, to me, there's no harm in getting on your horse, doing a little bit of exploration to at least have a plan B. Because what happens when a firm is sold, it's a rush. Every advisor at that firm is talking to likely many of the same firms. Those firms are taxed. Those firms are overwhelmed. You're getting inundated with calls from everyone and their mother. So if you can take a step back, kind of use the benefit of time to even just look at it as, look, all this might be a waste because nothing happens. But I found it's never a waste, because worst case, you got educated, you started developing a plan B, and you jumped to the front of the line if something does happen. What do you think?
I think that's spot on. Like, a theme of a lot of these answers to me for almost any of these scenarios is we have this unique landscape in wealth management where advisors have the opportunity to put a plan B in place and conduct due diligence with low stakes. Like, the stakes that we're talking about here is it requires a time commitment on the advisor side. And I, of course, understand confidentiality concerns. We almost never come across firms or advisors breaching confidentiality. So if you're thinking about, a plan B is a great antidote to a lot of these where, if God forbid my firm changes compensation or sells to somebody who's unpalatable or buys a firm that doesn't fit with our culture, by just having a plan B, you avert, I think, a lot of the panic. And as we said, that's not a sales pitch. It doesn't mean that you're ultimately going to take it, but I verily believe there's power in a plan B, just because even if you say there's nothing else better out there, then you can say, my firm is the best possible place for me to serve clients. So specific to private equity, do you think it's a bad thing? So let's use Janney as an example. KKR comes in and buys a controlling piece of Janney. Is that such a bad thing for Janney advisors?
I don't think so. I mean, like, again, looking at the culture of Janney and its strategy, like, part of the spin or the pitch was we're privately held, we make long-term decisions, and we're different from all the other firms. So from that standpoint, it could be perceived as bad. But I think in this case, KKR is probably the top private equity sponsor in the world. They're very shrewd. They make great investments, and firms need capital to compete, whether it's to pay big recruiting deals to be competitive, which is going to enhance the firm's scale, whether it's to overhaul technology or hire more subject matter experts or buy out retiring partners of the firm. So typically in our industry, when private equity comes in, not a whole lot changes. A lot of folks, mainly because of what they've seen in the press or an experience a client had, worry about private equity coming in, stripping the firm down to parts, changing everything, and then selling it a couple of years later. We don't normally see that in this industry. Private equity, they're typically not operators. They're more capital partners and strategic partners. And at the end of the day, any wealth management firm is a human capital business, and it's all about the advisors and the clients. So you can't really do too much to drive cost efficiencies. The big thing is just with any private equity deal, they typically have a 5 to 7 year hold period. So there is certainty that there will be some sort of other event or transaction, whether it's a private equity recap, it's trading the investment from one fund to the other, an IPO, or I guess the dreaded sale to a strategic buyer, meaning another firm is the buyer. So I think that's where it could be bad. But typically it's just status quo, business as usual when private equity comes in.
And as you're talking, it strikes me that there's interesting, on the one hand, advisors want firms not obviously to cut their payout. They want their payouts as high as possible, and they want more resources. That's a fact. Advisors are demanding more than ever from their firms. But on the other hand, they're generally averse to capital partners, right? They're averse to the firm raise. I guess it's different with publicly traded companies, but usually, at least in our conversations with advisors, it seems that private equity is a little bit of a negative connotation. And I think your point is that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't need to de facto be the case. And maybe there's a little too much cynicism in certain pockets.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. The overarching theme here is plan B. But I think the other piece that should give advisors some comfort is no matter where you practice, if you're at a firm that legally believes they own the clients, or you're independent and you own your business, you own your data, you own your clients, At the end of the day, relationships are king, and no firm or no employment agreement can legally restrict who a client works with. So even if you leave the firm, if your clients are going to get redistributed and it's a pain in the butt to transition, at the end of the day, good advisors who actually have the relationships, they generated them, they service them, are really in way more control and have way more leverage than I think the firms think they do, and many times advisors think they do. So I think just having that in mind is I'm never like truly stuck. Yeah, there's forgivable notes that tie people up. There's retiring advisor deals. There's non-competes, non-solicits, et cetera. But they have what matters. The intangible is the trust and the goodwill and the relationships that they have with their clients.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I want to emphasize now, some of these examples have been pretty extreme in severity, meaning dramatic changes to compensation, an entire firm being bought and sold. But not all of these, what we call, battles for control, are so macro. So the next one I want to throw at you is, and this was common after the financial crisis as many firms changed ownership rapidly, where there was culture clashes. And one way those culture clashes manifested was in pressures to cross-sell certain products. So I'll use Bank of America and Merrill as an example. There was a honeymoon period post-acquisition. I think it became apparent to Merrill advisors after a certain period of time that the good old days were gone. They were in more of the Bank of America construct. And so part of the manifestation of that was pressure to cross-sell Bank of America products, and that frustrated advisors. That's obviously not a big enough frustration, probably, that an advisor is going to switch firms. So does an advisor just grit and bear it? Do they oblige? Like, how do advisors think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just you just take in the data points because the barriers to exit a firm are so high and the switching costs in this industry are astronomical as far as the risk advisors take, the amount of work, the uncertainty, and just the uncomfortability of change. Like one thing probably isn't enough to motivate change, but it's more so just taking inventory. It's okay, I could take this, I got it, that's fine. It's not that big of a deal. That's a pain in the butt, but it doesn't really change things. But it's when a ton of different things add up, or there's something major that impacts either the type of business an advisor can do, whether it's serving international clients or consulting to unions or working with clients below $1 million of investable assets, or fill in the blanks, where that's an example where one thing could be enough to make a change. But to me, the example of B of A buys Merrill and there's cross-selling pressures, advisors can typically overcome them or circumvent them. But when it becomes one of a number of things that start to add up, that's where you start to see an incongruency develop between an advisor and their firm.
Yeah, and that's, I think, when we do informal exit interviews with advisors, so meaning we talk to advisors just post-transition that we've worked with, or even before the transition, they will sometimes point to a single factor, right? My firm cut compensation, but usually it's what you're describing. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. And maybe that straw resulted in losing an important client, or it was an aha moment for them. But a lot of times it's the sum total of these micro or seemingly minor battles for control that result in advisors leaving. And the next example I want to give you is the perfect example of this, which is advisor marketing presence. And maybe the answer you're going to give me here is this is one where you really just need to be independent. But what's the antidote? Is a good solution for advisors who want to be doing more on social media? They want to be able to send videos to their clients, and they know the firms just don't allow it, and they've taken such a narrow view of how advisors can market themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first one is just to decide like how important is this to my business? Because for many advisors, like who wouldn't want to have the option to be able to have their own brand or to show up on social media or to do videos or to do a podcast. So, I mean, everyone wants that, but it doesn't mean you're going to do it or it's that important. So I think you got to, again, take the good with the bad. So, okay, I can't do this, but that's fine because the brand I'm under is amazing. The platform's exceptional. My clients are well served. I have a great team. I have amazing subject matter experts. And on par, it doesn't really matter that much. But we've seen some advisors where they think the secret to their growth is having a social media presence, or that it's critical to getting data and information out to clients in real time. And it becomes a motivating factor. You don't necessarily have to be independent to have a social media presence. There's W-2 firms that allow you to have your own sub-brand, that have in-house marketing agencies, that allow you to have a voice, even if it might be moderated or monitored by compliance by a larger degree. So I think it's one where, look, you just got to decide how important it is to you and what are you going to be giving up in the process if you really want to act on going somewhere and pursuing a social media or marketing strategy.
Yeah, I love that answer.
Let me give you one other one that I think is really top of mind these days. It's just the possibility of being terminated. And this is true if you're independent at a broker dealer, you're affiliated with an RIA, you're employed by a wirehouse, you're employed by a bank, a private bank, a credit union. It doesn't matter. As long as you're on someone else's platform and you're not running your own SEC registered RIA, you have possibility for termination. And I think there's some firms and models, they have a real zero tolerance policy when it comes to anything compliance. Others are, let's work through the solutions, but you're never fully safe. There's always possibility of doing something or missing something or a client filing a complaint that triggers something else. So I think that's the biggest one as far as control is as long as you're on someone else's platform and it's not your own RIA where you control compliance and policies and the like, that's an element where you never fully have control over it. And all you have control over is being the best advisor and corporate citizen you can be and following compliance rules, working with compliance as much as possible. But we've seen plenty of examples where something completely beyond an advisor's control happens. A client files a $5 million complaint for a very reasonable trade. Then all of a sudden, the advisor has a bullseye on their back. I think that's probably the most tangible one that every advisor, regardless of where they are, should feel and should be mindful of.
It's certainly the one, and that's funny because that was exactly where I was going to wrap with, not to be punny, but I was going to conclude with a point about termination as well, because this is the one I think we hear about as it relates to this topic the most, where especially big advisors who are more or less left alone, they go about their day and they think, well, yeah, I work for a W-2 firm, I work for a wirehouse, but I can do my own thing. I'm basically independent, I'm very autonomous. And then something happens. And it's not always like I'm placed on heightened supervision. Sometimes the manager calls you into an office and starts asking a question, a client complaint, a slap on, whatever it is. And it makes them think, oh my God, I'm vulnerable. And I can't tell you how many calls we get from advisors in panic mode in that situation who feel my life's work can be upended with one flick of the pen, if you will. So more to the point of a plan B. A plan B does not mean you ultimately have to act on it. It means that you as a financial advisor in 2025 control an asset with tremendous value. And in order to be a wise and smart steward of that asset and of that business, I think having a plan B is an important part of that kind of business plan. Any concluding thoughts, Lewis?
Yeah, plan B, I think just taking the good with the bad and just really always taking stock of, okay, I might not be fully in control of all these examples and many other things, but recognizing whether it's good enough and whether there's enough to like and enough to benefit from staying the course.
Thank you so much for joining me, Lewis. This was a blast. I think it's a really important topic and not always the most fun topic to talk about, but I think it's a critical topic and I'm grateful you joined me today.
Anytime.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.